Beneath the Backcountry by P.J. Taylor. Chapter 1. The wind pressed through the spruce and lodgepole pines in long, whispering gusts, carrying with it the sharp, resinous tang of sap and the faint mineral bite of snowmelt from higher elevations. To James Wolfe, it was a sound as familiar as breathing. He had been walking the trails of the northern Rockies since he was a teenager, and the murmur of the backcountry, sometimes soothing, sometimes sinister, was a language he had learned to respect. He shifted the strap of his pack, squinting up at the jagged ridgeline. The sun was just starting to clear the eastern slope, painting the granite teeth in a wash of pale gold. Below him, the forest sprawled in endless folds of green and shadow, broken by sudden cliffs and streams that caught the light like shards of glass. It was beautiful, yes, but beauty in the backcountry came with a warning. James adjusted the radio mic on his shoulder. "Station Echo, this is Wolfe, beginning patrol East Ridge. Copy?" Static crackled, followed by the calm voice of Thomas Hale, the senior ranger at their outpost. "Copy, Wolfe. Watch your footing up there. Snow's still sticking in the gullies. You'll be solo till noon, then link with Proctor down by Harlow Creek. Over." "Roger that." James clipped the mic back to his vest and continued upward. His boots dug into the frost-hardened earth, leaving faint impressions that would vanish with the next thaw. This was routine. Patrol the trails, check the backcountry permits left at the station log, make sure no hikers had wandered where they shouldn't. 90% of ranger life was routine. Paperwork, trail checks, visitor safety talks. But that last 10% was what kept the job sharp. Rescue calls, wildfires, injured climbers, and the things Thomas never talked about directly, but hinted at. James had been a backcountry ranger for 14 years, but had only been stationed here for 3 seasons. He was still earning his footing in the shadow of Hale, whose family had worn the ranger badge on these mountains for 3 generations. Thomas's grandfather had patrolled these same ridges on horseback. His father had fought fires that rolled through the valleys in the 70s. Now Thomas was the old sentinel, a man who carried history like an invisible pack on his shoulders. And he was a man who noticed things. Strange things. James reached a bend in the trail where a rock slide years ago had torn the slope bare. He crouched, scanning the mud where patches of snow lingered. Elk prints, coyote, a few squirrel tracks, winding to the tree line. All expected. He let out a breath and straightened. Then he noticed something else. At first he thought it was a bear print sunk deep into the soft ground. But the shape was wrong. The heel stretched longer, different from the indigenous predator tracks found in the area. 4 distinct toes pressed into the mud, not 5, and the claw marks dug so deep it looked like whatever left them had carried serious weight. James knelt again, brushing pine needles aside. The impression was clearer than he liked. Large, not fresh. Edges had softened, but recent enough to give him pause. He touched his mic. "Station Echo, Wolfe here. Got some unusual tracks on the East Ridge. Might be a distorted bear track, but I don't like the look." There was a pause before Thomas answered. "Copy. Photograph if you can, then continue. I'll take a look this afternoon." The hesitation in Hale's voice prickled James's skin. Thomas was cautious, but he wasn't easily rattled, and he didn't dismiss things outright. James snapped a photo with his issued camera, then stood and followed the ridge trail. The sun was higher now, burning off the frost and lighting the valleys in vivid greens. Birds called in scattered bursts. From a distance, everything looked normal, peaceful even. Yet James couldn't shake the weight of those tracks. By mid-morning he reached the ridge crest, where the forest opened to a clearing. He paused, pulling his water bottle free. The air was thin, crisp, the kind that carried sound far. That was when he heard it. Not the wind, not an elk bugle or a coyote's yip. This was lower, rolling faintly across the timber like distant thunder. A rumble that didn't fit. It lasted only a few seconds before fading into silence. James froze, bottle halfway to his lips. He waited. The forest went still around him, as if listening too. No echo followed. He exhaled and capped the bottle, forcing himself to move on. Probably just rockfall in one of the gullies. Probably. Still, the unease lingered. By the time he reached Harlow Creek, the sun had climbed past its peak. The water rushed cold and fast from the melting snows above, tumbling over rocks, slick with moss. Sam Proctor was already there, crouched near the bank and adjusting the strap on his fly rod. "About time," Sam called, grinning, his round, sunburned face crinkled at the edges. "I was starting to think Hale sent you the long way on purpose." James dropped his pack and stretched his back. "Found some strange animal sign on the ridge. Thought I'd let you catch the fish first." Sam snorted. "If I catch anything, it'll be a miracle. River's running too cold still." He reeled the line in and stood. "So what kind of sign?" James hesitated. He didn't want to sound jumpy. "Could have been bear, but the print was odd. Long heel, heavy claws. I photographed it." Sam raised his brows. "Thomas'll want to see that." "Already told him." Sam shrugged, slinging his rod across his shoulder. "Well, we've seen weirder things out here. There was an incident last summer. Hale never did figure that one out." James vaguely remembered. He did. Remember, Hale pacing around like he was trying to piece something together. The two of them hiked the rest of the patrol loop together, checking trail markers and clearing a few fallen branches. Conversation stayed light, but James noticed Sam's hand brushing his bear spray more often than usual. Out here, instincts mattered. Back at Echo Station, the rest of the team was gathered around the worn wooden table in the common room. Maps were spread across the surface. Corners weighted with mugs and radios. The air smelled of coffee and damp wool. Thomas Hale looked up as James entered. His lined face was stern, with his gray-streaked beard catching the light. Isabel Taylor leaned against the stove nearby, arms crossed. Kyle Bennett sat with his boots propped on a chair, carving a piece of wood into something unrecognizable. And Evan Cross, quiet, watchful. Evan was flipping through the day's logbook. James dropped into a seat. "Found that strange sign on the ridge. Photos here." He slid the camera across. Thomas studied the screen, brows knitting. He didn't speak right away. Finally, he passed it to Isabel. "Not a bear," she said, shaking her head. "Not a cat either. What the hell makes a print like that?" Kyle let out a low whistle. "Maybe some mutant gator wandered up from Florida?" No one laughed. Thomas tapped the table. "I'll check the ridge myself tomorrow. For now, it stays between us. No need to start ghost stories when the season's barely begun." Evan finally looked up from the logbook. His expression was calm, unreadable. "Could be just erosion distorting a track. Happens." James caught his gaze. Something in Evan's tone was too certain, like he wanted the subject closed. Thomas nodded once. "Maybe. Still, we watch. If there's a new predator roaming, we'll know soon enough." The room fell silent, except for the hiss of the stove. Outside, the wind rattled against the cabin walls. James sat back, unease gnawing at him. He'd walked this country for years. He knew the tracks of bear, moose, elk, wolf. What he'd seen on that ridge wasn't any of them. And the rumble in the forest still echoed faintly in his ears. The mood in Echo Station remained taut even after the meeting broke. Isabel busied herself with gear checks, laying out medical packs on the long counter near the stove. Kyle retreated to the bunk room, whittling knife still in hand, muttering about how the government didn't pay him enough to deal with cryptid crap. Sam sorted through a tangle of fishing line and radio cords, pretending to look relaxed. Evan was the only one who seemed entirely calm. He logged notes into the incident ledger with neat, precise handwriting, then closed the book with a quiet snap. "Supposed to rain tonight," he said conversationally. "Might make tomorrow's patrols messy." James didn't answer. He moved to the window instead, peering at the dark forest pressing close to the cabin. The pines stood motionless in the fading light, branches drooping under their own weight. To most, it would look like any evening in the Rockies, but James couldn't shake the feeling that the trees were concealing something. Thomas joined him, coffee mug in hand. "Trust your eyes," he said quietly, so only James could hear. James turned. "You think it was real?" "I think," Thomas said, "that this land has shown me things over the years I still don't have names for. Your track may be one of them." He sipped his coffee. But I also think fear is like water. Once it finds a crack, it seeps everywhere. We'll tread carefully. The older ranger clapped his shoulder and moved off to his quarters, leaving James with the weight of his words. Dinner was simple. Beans and rice cooked on the propane stove, biscuits hard enough to crack teeth. Isabel was the best cook among them, but even she couldn't make backcountry rations glamorous. They ate together at the long table, the atmosphere loosening with the comfort of food. Sam cracked jokes about nearly falling into Harlow Creek earlier. Kyle argued that he should be allowed to carry a sidearm, heavier than the issued Glock. Isabel shot that down with a glare sharp enough to cut rope. Evan listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was with measured precision, as if every word had been considered twice before being allowed out. "The ridge is difficult terrain," he said when Sam asked his opinion of the print. "Could be overlapping tracks. Elk hooves, maybe." James watched him carefully. He'd never quite figured Evan out. The man was competent, never shirked patrol, knew knots and maps better than anyone, but he carried himself like someone playing the part. Maybe it was just his quiet nature, maybe not. When the meal was done, Isabel washed dishes, while Kyle and Sam argued over a game of cards. James excused himself and stepped outside into the chill. The station sat on a small rise above the valley, its log walls blending into the surrounding forest. From the porch, James could see the shadowy outline of the ridges he had patrolled earlier. The air smelled of damp earth, carrying the faint musk of pine needles and wood smoke. He leaned against the railing, listening. The forest at night was never truly silent. Owls called, insects buzzed in erratic bursts. Sometimes a coyote yipped across the valley. Tonight those sounds were present, but beneath them was something else. A hush. Not absence, but pressure, as if the forest were holding its breath. James's hand drifted unconsciously toward the flashlight clipped to his belt. He clicked it on, the beam cutting a narrow cone into the trees. The light touched bark, undergrowth, the glint of water off the creek. Nothing unusual. Then something moved. Not far, 30 yards at most, a flicker of shadow between the trunks. Too large for a deer, too quick for a bear. It was there and gone in an instant. James froze. The flashlight beam wavered. He felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. "See something?" The voice made him start. Evan stood in the doorway behind him, face half in shadow. "Thought I did," James admitted, keeping his eyes on the tree line. "Something moving." Evan stepped onto the porch, hands in his pockets. His expression was unreadable. Forest plays tricks at night. Light catches wrong. Branches sway. Your mind fills the gaps. "Maybe." James lowered the flashlight. "Still." The radio on his shoulder crackled. Isabel's voice. "Station to Wolf. Check perimeter west side. Got movement on thermal from the sensor near the shed." James answered, "On it." He moved off the porch, boots crunching on gravel. Evan stayed where he was, watching. The west side of the station sloped toward a tool shed in the edge of the forest. James swept the flashlight across the area. Shadows leapt and twisted. The shed loomed small and square, its door slightly ajar. That was odd. Thomas was meticulous about locking it after supper. James approached slowly, the beam steady in his hand. He called out, "Station Echo Ranger. Whoever's out there, identify yourself." Silence. He reached the shed, nudged the door wider with his boot. The smell of oil and sawdust rolled out. Inside, rakes and shovels hung in neat rows. Chainsaw on the bench. Nothing disturbed. But the dirt outside the threshold told another story. James angled the light down. There in the soil were prints. Not boots, not hooves, not paws. Impressions long and narrow, with claw marks gouged deep. The same shape he'd seen on the ridge. Fresher. Adrenaline surged through him. He pulled his camera, snapped photos quickly, then backed away, scanning the tree line. Something moved again, a flicker at the edge of the light. This time he caught more detail. A shape low and powerful, scales glinting briefly before vanishing into the dark. He swore under his breath, keyed the radio. "Echo Station, it's Wolf. We've got an unknown sign at the shed. Recommend full team check. Voices overlapped in the static. Isabel. On our way. Kyle. If this is another prank, I'm gonna kill you. Within minutes, the others joined him, weapons at their sides, flashlights sweeping the forest. Thomas examined the tracks silently, jaw tight. Isabel muttered something sharp under her breath. Sam kept glancing into the trees as though expecting something to lunge at him. Only Evan remained perfectly composed. He crouched, ran a finger near the print without touching it, then straightened. Could still be erosion, he said flatly. Thomas shot him a look. Erosion doesn't make fresh claw marks. The group spread out searching, but found nothing more. No movement, no sound except their own breathing. Finally, Thomas called it. Back inside. We'll set a watch tonight. They returned to the cabin, locking the doors, bolting shutters that hadn't been touched in years. The atmosphere had shifted. The casual camaraderie of dinner was gone, replaced by a quiet vigilance. James lay in his bunk later, staring at the ceiling. Around him, the others shifted restlessly in sleep, or pretended to. Outside, the forest stretched endless and dark, pressing against the cabin walls. Somewhere out there, something had walked on two legs, left reptilian tracks, and watched them from the tree line. James listened to the silence staring at the ceiling until his eyes burned. Then, faintly, he heard it again, the low, rolling rumble, like thunder with no storm. This is the end of Chapter 1. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe for the next chapter.